Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives. Not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us. Brad's Engineering. Thank you, Brad, at Genesis Communications Network, the powerhouse of communications. I'm Vin Finelli. Kyle Harris is with us. And today we're going to be talking about tips from my book, and I've invited him to join me to add, subtract, multiply, or divide some of these tips and his experiences and share with you his thoughts based on some of the things that I have in my unpublished, unfinished, unorganized, not-for-sale book. And Kyle went to college for automotive training. He managed tire sales. He's a certified welder. He worked at a dealership as an assistant service technician. And so he was the guy between the customer saying, here's what my car or truck is doing, and the mechanics. And then he would report back to the customers as to what happened, why it happened, and what to do to prevent it. So Kyle has done those things, and he's built buildings. He is a heavy equipment operator. He knows how to do a lot about a lot. So I thought he'd be the perfect guy to talk about some of these tips from the book. Welcome, Kyle.
Good morning, Vince. You know what's so funny, Vince? I was thinking about today's show a lot, and my wife had mentioned, you'd ask about a lot of the different things I've done and over the years, and all of a sudden I just kind of waxed philosophical about some of those things. You and I both, and, a whole bunch of the other instructors that were here, we sort of did what we needed to do. And that's how we ended up where we are. You know what I'm saying by that?
Absolutely. We had a problem in front of us, and we looked to the left and looked to the right and realized that if it was going to get solved, we had to do it. And so we used our ingenuity, we used our wherewithal, we used our talents, we used our research skills, and we did it. Yes.
Yeah, so I was thinking about something. There's an old song by Don Williams that talks about, he said in this song, he says, I knew a cowboy in South Texas. His face was burnt deep by the sun, and he was part history, part sage, and part Mexican. And he sings about this song, and I love this song. But anyway, he says in this song, he said, he cursed all the oil men, the roads and the oil men, and he cursed the automobile. And I was sort of pondering that for a while. And I got to thinking about something that's really, I've come to a conclusion. When we talk about the frontiersmen and the pioneers that moved west and conquered the land and all of the things that they learned and had to learn how to do and innovate and change and modify and adapt to these different things, a lot of them died. But this is an important phrase right here. The society that they created by their struggle was the best one. And when it occurred to me that when they had accomplished what they had accomplished, and then their children's 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 children didn't have to do that anymore, they become corrupted and weak. And it's like I have come to the conclusion that a person needs land to be able to work and to have projects and to do things with that keeps him stretching and working and overcoming and adapting in order to really be able to say that he lived. And so it's like, I didn't mean to jump too far track, but I kind of been thinking about that for about a week now, just pondering on those ideas, because you have your cows, you have your land, you have projects that you've got to do. I've got land now, and I have projects, and I create projects all the time because it's sort of like in my DNA to have to create, adapt, overcome, fix, repair. And those are the things that make life kind of like worth living to me.
So I very, very well said. A lot of times I'll walk into the kitchen and the family will be there, Mrs. Finelli and the boys, and I'll say, hey, and they'll go, no new projects.
But you know something, in the end, one of these days, I think they will thank you for that, because, and I believe, it's like, I don't know about how your kids do things, but when I come up with ideas, and it's constantly, if they tell me they're working on something or anything, I will have an idea about how they might adapt it or change it or something along those lines to make it work out better for them in the end. And most of the time they take it, because they realize that, Dad's done been down this road once or twice or 3 or 50 times, But I agree with you. It's like there's so many different things that we both have done, and we kind of did those things. I mean, in my life anyway, I did those things because I had a family to support, and I had to deal with 2 bad back injuries, and now this disease that I've got that's similar to MS. But those things I deal with on a constant basis. And it's something that I have to overcome every day, but it is not something that is not overcomable at this point in my life, thank God. But anyway, let's get back to your unpublished, unfinished, constantly evolving, not for sale book.
Yeah, and I have, class, this is not a teaser. I really have no intention of selling this book, but I do have an intention of teaching from it. And so it's not like I'm trying to make money. I have no intention of making money from USA Prepares. None whatsoever. And, well, actually, I shouldn't say that, because the IRS wants me to try to make money. Okay. So, IRS, I'm trying really hard. I just don't know how to do it. Okay. So, at our next audit, please be prepared to present me with all your ideas and, suggestions for how I can make money with USA Prepares. And I'll consider them. I'll actually bring it to the board of directors of USA Prepares, and we will meet about it, and we'll see if we like the IRS's suggestions on how USA Prepares can make money. But right now, we can't figure out how to do it. And by the way, I am the board of directors. So, Kyle, in your experience as a person working in the automotive industry, at the level where you would be seated, standing, and talking to customers and the mechanics and trying to explain between the two of them what is going on with their vehicles and what the repairs are and why it happened and why it costs so much and those kinds of things, and what to do to prevent it. I mentioned on the air for quite a while that we're having problems with General Motors, and this relates to the book. General Motors engines in their light trucks, their half-ton and three-quarter-ton pickups. They have a V8 engine. It's a 5300 5.3 liter, and we have seen problems with this where there's blow-by. Blow-by is when the piston goes up into the compression stroke and there's an explosion, which is, what it's supposed to do, a gas-air mixture explosion. There is high pressure, and some of that leaks past the rings, the piston rings, into the crankcase. Those extra pressures and oil mixture and combustion gas blow-by is supposed to be vented out through a positive crankcase ventilation system. And because of the excessive blow-by and because the oil control rings and the compression rings don't do their job properly, they weren't engineered properly, there is excessive blow-by. The excessive blow-by is an oil vapor, an oily vapor, which gets into through the positive crankcase ventilation system, and it clogs up the system, and then oil pressure, this misty oil, goes into the intake system, and it interferes with the throttle body, the throttle position sensor, and it fails because it's not designed to be bathed in a mist of oil. So this happens, and the engine starts stumbling and failing and go into limp mode and cause all kinds of problems. Well, we've been reporting this, and we've been reporting that it is it's a design flaw. It's a manufacturing flaw. There's now a class action suit against General Motors for this specific problem. And I just wanted to say that, we independently here at our farm have figured this out, but we weren't aware until yesterday of this class action lawsuit. And here's what it's saying. It's saying that General Motors designed the engine to use excessive oil because of this escaping mist from the crankcase through bad design and bad manufacturing. So it is a failure that's engineered in. And this is so expensive that it causes these vehicles to stop running. Now, we've fixed several of these for this problem. And I've talked about the repair parts, and the repair parts that come from China are defective in manufacturing. They can cause a throttle body open position where you can step on the accelerator, and with the repair part, the butterfly of the throttle body will stick open because of the machining of the plastic parts and the molding of the plastic parts that hold part of this throttle body together. So what I'm saying is it's a serious problem. It's real, and it did not have to happen, because I never remember in my entire life having a vehicle with a throttle body or a carburetor that had problems like this. It never happened because we didn't have these ridiculous designs. So the bottom line is General Motors has done a couple of things. One, bad design causing limp mode conditions because of the mist from the oil that is under pressure in the crankcase because the positive crankcase ventilation system fails. The other thing is I don't think the oil is good enough to scrub the deposits that are in the contaminating oil from the poor combustion because of the ring problem. And customers are not changing their oil often enough. I don't think the recommendation is often enough. And the other thing, there are several parts of this. Another problem is the oil filters get plugged because the oil's not getting changed enough. So the oil filters just can't remove any more of these contaminants, which causes them to plug up the crankcase and the PCV system. And you put all this together, and the cars just go into limp mode and stop running, and oil consumption is higher. And if you look at the dashboard and it says, change oil now, that doesn't check the oil level. That just is a suggestion as to when you should change the oil based on how the engine's been run. Temperatures, speeds, those kinds of things. It does not check the level of the oil. So if you don't check your own level with the dipstick, you're tempting fate. I'd love to hear your comments about this when we come back. Kyle Harris is with us.
Sure.
Kyle's in the front of the classroom today, and we're talking about a very serious issue with General Motors engines and the 5.3 liter V8 in its trucks. General Motors knew about this since 2007, and the vehicles that are implicated in this class action lawsuit are 2010 through 2014 Chevy Avalanches, Silverados, Suburbans, Tahoes, Sierras, Yukons, and Yukon XL. And General Motors knew about this in 2007. They continued manufacturing this. And what happens is there are problems with the oil being contaminated, and the PCV system gets clogged up, and ultimately the engines can run poorly, the spark plugs can foul, and we've seen all this. We've seen it here at the farm on customers' vehicles. And General Motors has advises its dealers to use chemical abrasives to decarbonize the engine's rings in combustion chambers. Now, I want you to think about this. They want you to use an abrasive in the engine. That's exactly why you change the oil, to get the abrasives out of the oil. Okay. But that's what they're recommending. It's only a temporary fix, they say. And this is like the most crazy thing I've heard of. Kyle, what are your thoughts about what I've said?
Well, it's really interesting you mentioned that, Vince, because I've had two particular instances in the last 3 years that have come up over those very kind of issues. An acquaintance, a friend of mine, who had a newer Suburban with the cylinders that will cut out at highway speeds. His had the 5.3 in it, and interestingly, he started using an enormous amount of oil. And I mean, finally, it got down to where it was a quart of oil every 300 miles. And this still was under warranty. And they said that there was a recall or an update, to fix the engine, go in there and do the engine. But when they tore into the engine, it was so bad, they completely replaced his engine. And that was under 36,000 miles. And the interesting thing about this is that is a newer one. In 1999, which they come out with this engine, I think in 98, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong on that. I don't remember. But I know a friend, an acquaintance of mine, this guy, I didn't know him that well, but he had a 1999 Chevy with the 5.3 in it. And he drove that truck for his work because they paid him so much mileage in his job, and he traveled all over the country. He had 373,000 miles on that engine, and the truck, the rest of the truck almost looked like new. I couldn't believe he had that kind of miles on it. But he thought so much of that truck that he went in and ordered another engine and put another engine in that. He did have to replace the transmission at about 250,000. But in any case, he was very meticulous about his maintenance on it. He would change the oil every 3,000 to 3,500 miles. But anyway, he thought so much of that truck in particular that he put another engine in it and just kept driving it. He said, they won't give me nothing for it if I trade it in and get a new truck. And I love this truck, so I'm just going to stay with it. But my daughter also has a Chevy Avalanche that is in that range, and I'm going to make her aware. I think hers is an 010 or 11, and I'm going to make her aware of that class action lawsuit. But, a lot of these problems come, in my opinion, from a board of directors who are demanding more profit. And it's interesting to me that the half-ton trucks, they've almost made like disposable vehicles. General Motors, Ford came out with their Taurus. That was sort of a disposable vehicle. General Motors had the Cavalier and all these other little bitty, they were, pieces of crap, really, cars. They didn't last much more than 100,000 miles, and you had to do major work to them, but they were sort of a disposable car. And in my opinion, the General Motors company has done that to the half-ton trucks. The 3/4 tons seem to be a lot better. I've seen them with 300,000 miles when they're about 011, 012, 013 areas. And they just keep going, the 6-liter. Oh, I hear the brake.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about this. Class, this really is part of the book, and it's how to discern the truth and how to avoid these pitfalls. We'll be right back. Class, I've got the greatest respect for our instructors here at USA Prepares. And the proof is that they're here. Because if the board of directors didn't have the greatest respect for them, they would have a meeting and these guys wouldn't be here. So I got to tell you, your instructors are the best of the best of the best. And I'm not exaggerating. And Kyle, I really appreciate what you do. So Rich Sheehan has called me a bunch of times over the years. And he asked, and I'm going to paraphrase this, and he will ask me, he'll say, Vin, so with the economy the way it is, the dollar being worth less, If a person had some extra wherewithal, some, let's say, savings, what would you suggest that person do, in terms of a vehicle? What kind of a new truck? He'd been to the auto dealers for some service or something on his truck, and they suggested that he get a new pickup truck. And he asked me, so what would you pay for a new truck? And I said, I wouldn't have one. And he said, so what if it was like 20,000? Would you get one? I said, no. 13,000? No. Rich, I wouldn't get one for free. And the reason is they are not dependable. They are not, you can't live with them. They are so complex. The emission systems, the engines, the engine control computers, there's so many, sensors and they're so poorly put together and they're so complex that even the dealerships can't seem to fix them. So I wouldn't have one. Now, I did buy a brand new truck. I bought it, maybe 2 months ago. I paid $3,500, 3500.00 for it. It's a 2001 Chevrolet pickup truck. It's a short bed, manual transmission. And the reason I bought it was because it didn't have any rust on it. It was from out of state, and they don't use road salt. So I bought this, and I've been rebuilding it. And I've been putting a lot of parts in it. By the time I'm done with this 20-year-old truck, it's going to cost me about $5,500 to $5,800. And that's with me doing and my son doing all the work. Right? So what, and I'm using this as a vehicle. I'm not bragging that I bought a brand new 20-year-old truck. What I'm trying to tell you is that it's crazy, in my opinion, to buy a new 2020 or 2021 truck or anything even like that because of the problems that Kyle and I are delineating right here. Kyle, any comments about that?
I totally agree, Vince. I wouldn't even take one for free. My dad used to have a saying, he said, you can get trouble for nothing. There ain't no use paying for it. And you need to write that book. You need to write that book of the Kyle Harris family sayings.
Okay, so I just went into the kitchen, got some coffee, and our son was there between working on in the automotive shop and farm work. And I said, so, son, what's coming in today? He said, well, I've got a truck coming in, and it's got the lights flicker in the back. Now, the owner of this pickup truck got pulled over by the police because the lights were out. Now, whenever we change the oil, we go over these vehicles very carefully, check the lights, and they were working fine. Well, we live on a lot of dirt roads here, lots of bumps and rocks, and so this banging just seems to exacerbate the problem with the lights, flickering. So the police gave her a warning, and so it's coming in for a complete wiring harness for the taillights. It's $42 from it's a Delco part, a General Motors part, because the Chinese ones aren't as good. So here's the point. Here's what I have found with lighting. Headlights, taillights, the wiring is thin. It's as thin as could possibly be. It's not oversized in any stretch. The connectors where the bulbs contact the sockets to the harness, they are weak and they seem to pit and corrode, and then the lights stop working. And the only fix, it used to be when they're made out of brass, you could use a file or a piece of emery cloth and kind of clean up the contacts and they'd be good to go. Not anymore. Now you have to replace the wiring harness. And we're finding that we have to replace the headlight connectors for the bulbs because the headlights get so hot that they deform, melt, and cause corrosion on the contacts between the headlight bulbs and the sockets and the taillights. Same kind of problems. Kyle, the pigtail connectors for headlights are about $8 a piece. So it's not bad. You can do this yourself, class. The reason I'm telling you all this is so that you can connect the dots and say, my headlights aren't working. Maybe I can get that part at, AutoZone or wherever. But make sure you get the, good quality one because the Chinese ones are junk, in my opinion. Kyle, any comments about those things? Have you seen that as well?
Well, you bet I have. As a matter of fact, it's interesting that you bring stuff up, Vince, that I've either dealt with recently or had to help somebody else with. When you replace taillights, folks, if you have to replace the wiring harness or the little twist-in plug that holds the bulb in the back, make sure that when you get up underneath there and crawl up underneath the truck and look at the rest of your wiring that's coming down and around to it, and make sure that it's in some kind of a protection. Because just like Vince said, these things are so thin and they're made to wear out. They're made to break. It's called planned obsolescence. And that's the way these dealerships and these car manufacturers anymore are counting on making a living. These cars they have to break down. It's interesting, Vince, I've seen the 3/4 ton Chevys up to about 012, and with the heavy duty front and rear ends and the heavier duty transmission and the 6-liter engine. I have seen the 6-liter. Now, I don't know about your experience, but my experience is that the 6-liter, other than it is kind of a little bit of a gas hog, is an incredible engine. It just seems to run virtually forever. I mean, you might have a water pump or, that happens with anybody. But or a coil pack or something along those lines. But the engines themselves, I don't know what they did with them or how they are different. And I'm sure that they will eventually put their planned obsolescence program in those engines as well. But up to about 012, I know, at least my experience, up to about 012, those trucks will just last and last and last. What's your opinion on that?
Well, I have experience with this Chevrolet, and it's called a 350. And that engine's been around for a long, long time. It's an old V design, yep. Cast iron block, cast iron heads, and it's rebranded as the 5.7. I know that is great. And I know that from my perspective, in many respects, the scaled down version of the 4.3 liter, which is that engine but 2 cylinders lopped off to take a V8 and make it a V6, has worked for me, except that we are plagued with problems with coolant leaks out of the intake manifold, because General Motors has gone from a really great design with the cast iron intake manifold to an aluminum intake manifold, and they've gone to a gasket system for the ports, the intake ports from the intake manifold to the cylinder heads. They use this hard plastic with O-rings design for the intake manifold. And then to seal the oil gallery so that oil doesn't leak out the front or the back of the engine, they just say, well, just use this silicone, tube of silicone, we'll call it caulk, and just apply that. And you make like a 1/8 or 1/4 inch high bead of caulk, and that's it. I mean, this is like beyond stupid, because they had a brilliant design, years ago that worked. Now we have head bolts that stretch, and then the head gaskets leak, and then the engines blow. I mean, these are just beyond ridiculous designs. We have, we rebuilt, my 6.5 turbo liter, V8 Chevy engine. And we had to buy new head bolts, because when you take the heads off to replace the head gasket, we had a head gasket leak, after, I don't know, 250,000 miles. The original head bolts, you can't use them again because they stretch. So you have to buy $60, $80, $100 worth of head bolts. Now I have two 1968 AMXs. Those things I've rebuilt one of those. One of them was my race car, and I had it on the track. I took the engine out 13 times, had the heads off 13 times, same head bolts from 1968, and they still work. That's 50 years, right? Well, here we have, you have to buy head gaskets, obviously, but you have to buy new head bolts. It's just beyond crazy what these car companies are doing to us. Well, you were talking about the wires underneath, the harnesses. I believe what you're talking about is something called split loom. And it's kind of like a ribbed plastic. It looks like, something you might drain water away from your leaders in your house, except it's small, maybe 1/4 inch or 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch in diameter. And you can buy 20 feet of it. By 20 feet of it, it's polyethylene. for $10 shipped on eBay. Now, we keep hundreds of feet of that in our automotive shop. And when we work under a car and we see wires that, harnesses that are unprotected, we put this split loom on them. And you can use zip ties, to tie the ends so they don't come off. And literally what it is, it's flexible plastic. It's like a hose. It's black. And it's ribbed so it'll bend in all kinds of directions. And it's like an armor shielding for the wires. That's what it is. It's used on trailers. It's used on underneath cars. The factories use it. And you can buy it and you can do it yourself. And you don't have to cut the wires. It's split down the middle long ways so it'll fit over the wires and it forms a tight seal. Now, is it watertight? No. But what it really does is it keeps the dust and rocks and chafing from destroying your wiring harnesses. Kyle, your comments.
That's exactly correct, Vince. Yep. And I always try to use some kind of a dielectric type grease. If I put those, when I plug those in or turn them in, where the connector goes into the light socket, because if you don't, they dry out, they corrode, and like you said, they burn so hot that they tend to, it'll corrode your connector right in there. Anytime there's any connection spot, it tends to corrode that. And then if you get anything in there, it'll ruin that light bulb.
And here's a couple other thoughts, along with what you're saying. Class, I know that you've plugged a toaster in or you've plugged something into your AC outlet and you've seen it spark. I mean, just a little tiny spark. And if you look at the prongs of your plug, whether it be a toaster or a toaster oven or a mixer, whatever it happens to be, you'll see little tiny microscopic pits. Well, I believe that happens with the light bulb socket to light bulb connection. When you power up your headlights, it draws so much current that it causes a little tiny arc. And one of them's okay. 2 of them are okay. 5 of them are okay. But over time, there's so many pits, it probably looks like the surface of the moon. And that's when you have these failures, when the light bulbs don't work anymore because the socket has been damaged with these little tiny pits. And you can fix that. You can just replace the socket with some pigtails, $8 or so, and you'll be good to go. But as Kyle said, dielectric grease is where it's at. DI electric. It's about $6 a tube. Use it sparingly. It's synthetic, and it will preserve the connections to keep the moisture out. It really works well, but do not get it on the glass of the bulb because it'll cause the bulb to wear out. We'll be right back. Al Harris and I'll be talking about tips from the book, and he will be adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing with his thoughts. And isn't it interesting, class? Believe it or not. Well, Kyle, let me ask you, how much time have we spent preparing for this broadcast? How much time did we discuss the topics?
None. Zero.
Yeah, I remember it that way. I remember it that way too. Class?
Hey,
none of this.
I got a question for you, Vince.
Sure.
On the 4.3 that you worked on, or whatever that Chevy is.
Yeah, it's a 4.3 liter. Yeah.
Yeah, 4.3 liter. Because I helped a friend of mine do that very same thing about a year and a half ago. On his, he had a Oldsmobile Bravada with that engine in it, and was having bad leaks. And I told him because many years ago when we did this, in those channels in the bottom where the intake manifold set, they used to make a rubber inset that went down in there like the gasket. And so I told him unknowingly, he said he had a hard time finding that anymore, but he eventually did find a pair of them that we put one in the front and one in the back with a little bit of that high temperature RTV sealant down there to kind of hold it while we were putting the intake manifold back. And he's still driving that, and he said it's not leaking at all. And I was wondering, have you ever found those?
No, and you know, that was one of the things I was going to discuss, but I thought it'd be too complicated for radio. What Kyle's saying is the intake manifold has gaskets on the left and right, sides where the intake manifold mates in like a V shape. One side, matches the head on the right side of the engine, the other on the left. But the front and back, they used to have these rubber strips that were a U-channel strip, and you just put them in place, a little bit of aviation cement which is like a tacky tar cement, and it would last forever. That's the way it used to be. And no problems. They didn't fail. Now it's just put some RTV on there, some silicon caulk, and hope for the best. And it's a miserable job. And so, no, I did not find those. So we did it the way it's conventionally done, recommended by Felpro. And I don't like those guys anymore. Felpro, the gasket company, they used to be great. Now you call their tech support and they're mad at you. What are you calling us for? Well, we're calling you because your gaskets fail. That's why. And
really.
So anyway, you're absolutely right. If I could find them, that's what I'm going to do. And I need to do that to my 4.3 liter V6. That's the only problem I have with the engine. But I wanted to mention something else. Now you are an electrician, a commercial electrician. I've been awake at night thinking about this for weeks. And this is, it's a silly thing, but we've all seen it, but we haven't paid attention to it. And that is, when you plug your plug into the wall outlet, the plug most of the time has a little hole on the left, each prong. So not the ground one, but the AC prongs have a little hole near the end of the tip of the prong. And so my question is, why? Why are those there? So I went on the internet and I looked it up. And, one guy says, oh, it's for heat dissipation, because that prong gets hot. That's nonsense. Another guy said, well, just think of all the metal you'd save, if you punch out all these holes and you collected that metal and reused it. That's nonsense. I mean, that's a lot of operation for a little tiny punch out. So what is the reason? And I think I figured it. Oh, one guy said, oh yeah, well, what happens is there's a little detent in the socket. So you plug that, you put the plug into the AC socket on the wall. And I'm talking about a household socket. We all have these in our houses and homes and apartments. Another guy says, well, that detent is there because there's like a spring-loaded part in the socket or the receptacle and holds the plug from falling out. Well, that's not true either because there is none. So, Kyle, do you have any thoughts? I think I figured out the answer. And it has to do with what we were talking about with the GM light sockets in cars.
I don't, Vince. I could tell you one thing, though. If you would have ever just become a scientist, I'm sure you could have cured probably 50 different diseases because you just go after something like a pit bull and you figure it out. And I'm proud to have said that you're a friend. But what did you figure out for that hole? That's amazing. Okay. That's funny.
Oh, all right. Well, here it is. Now, I mentioned that when you plug something, there's a possibility when you plug one of these lamp cords, toaster plugs into the wall, there's a possibility that it can spark. If the light bulb is on, 100-watt light bulb back in the good old days, or a flood lamp or whatever it is, if it's drawing current, it could just arc just a little tiny bit. And that would put a pit on the tip of the plug and the socket where it connects, the metal parts where they connect. Well, I believe that hole is acts like a file. It's not really a file, but it will polish the connection of the plug and the socket when you insert the plug in, out. I believe that's it. That's the only reason that makes any sense to me, and that's why they're there. Except on some new Chi-Com products, they don't need no stinking hole. They don't do that because they don't care about you. And not only that, they made the prong shorter. The Chinese are the 10%ers. Well, we can do with 10% less, 10% shorter, 10% thinner. Just look at popsicle sticks that the Chinese are making. You can hardly hold on to them. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Kyle Harris is with us, and he's providing addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division of some of the things I've mentioning regarding the book. He's adding his comments, his experience, his suggestions, etc. Kyle, I mentioned the holes in the plugs of AC corded devices. What do you think about that being the wiper to clean off the contacts so that it removes, by inserting the plug into the receptacle or the outlet, that it removes the little pitting spots so that the receptacles last longer and the plugs last longer? What are your thoughts?
I think that very well could be, Vince. There's one other thought that occurred to me during the break on that issue. As well as I do, that when electricity is traveling down a wire. Okay, so it's being, if you plug it in, you've got power, amperage and voltage being applied to the wire. But most of that amperage and power is being transferred on the outside of the wire. You know that as well. The electrons travel on the outside of the wire. And that's why stranded wire will allow more amperage to get through and you will find than solid wire. So my thought there, the only other thought that's possible on that would be, I wonder if that dynamic, I'm not an engineer, but I wonder if that dynamic of having the hole in there allows more amperage to be transferred to the plug to make the device operate better. I don't know.
What you're talking about, electricity traveling on the outside of the wire. So think of it like this, class, a garden hose. Instead of the electricity traveling through the hose, as water would, the electricity travels on the skin, and that's called the skin effect. So there's two ways of looking at this. And AC electricity, believe it or not, alternating current, travels on the skin. DC travels through the wire. So we do it exactly backwards. If you go to a car, we use stranded wire. If you go to the house, we use solid wire. But commercial buildings, we use stranded wire when we wire commercial buildings for AC. The reason I believe that is because of the flexibility. If you use the solid wire to connect your starter or your headlights, your taillights, your radio, all that jiggling and moving, it would cause the wire to bend and bend and bend and finally break. So that's why they use stranded wire in automobiles. And it's cheaper to make solid wire than it is to make stranded wire. So we use solid wire for AC wiring in houses because you just put it in place and you leave it. And it doesn't bend and flex too much. Those are my thoughts. But you are right about electricity traveling on the outside. And that's called the skin effect. So if you look at your garden hose, it's not, when you pump water through it, you don't want a lot of skin effect because the water goes through the hose. And if you had like 1,000 little tiny pipettes, for a garden hose, you wouldn't get any water through because of all the restriction of the skin effect. So those are a couple comments. Kyle, I wanted to mention something that it bothers me when I see it, and that is trailer hitches. I have never seen anyone here in Missouri have a trailer hitch that they've used where the ball isn't substantially worn and the hitch itself isn't worn. And that's because what they do is when they hook up their trailer, they just put the hitch on the ball and off they go. They make sure that it's latched properly, but they don't clean the ball and they don't take a rag and clean out the inside of the trailer hitch, where it connects to the ball. They don't wipe the grit out of it. So what you've got is the equivalent of sandpaper, rubbing, between the ball and the hitch. And it just wears and wears and wears. And then that connection becomes sloppy. And as you go down the road, bang, 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 and it beats up the truck, it beats up the trailer, it beats up the driver. It's crazy. And that's not what we do. What we do is whenever we hook up a trailer, we have a bunch of them, all kinds of trailers. We've got a gooseneck trailer. We've got like a 10-foot. We've got a 8-foot. We've got an 18-foot car hauler. We've got a 16-foot utility trailer. We've got a whole bunch we have cattle trailer. We've got a lot of trailers. And what we do is we wipe out, with a paper towel, the grit that might be in the hitch, and we wipe off the ball. And then we put grease, fresh grease on that cleaned ball. We wipe it around the mating surfaces so that there's lubrication so that the ball and hitch don't wear against each other, metal on metal. And I don't know anybody else around here in Missouri that does that. What are your thoughts?
It's funny. It's so funny you mentioned this stuff, Vince. I can't even hardly believe it sometimes. I want to just bust out laughing because I don't do exactly what you do, but I will carry an older rag in my pickup. And not every time, but many times before I will hook the hitch up to my trailer, I will go out there with that oily rag and wipe off the hitch on the ball and then just use the same rag and rub inside the trailer ball part. But what I have done is I usually carry also in my truck some of that white spray-on white grease, and so I'll just hit it with a little tiny bit of grease before you drop the trailer hitch onto it. But anyway, just like you said, and folks, this kind of stuff that Vince is, and Vince is OCD and he knows it, and I am too a little bit, but not near to the great degree that he is. But he's a scientific OCD guy, and so one of the things that you will find is that down the road, he will not have to replace the stuff that he's got, and you will if you don't do it. If you don't use maintenance and forethought and pre-planning in your life to be able to keep things going, you're going to have to fix it. And it isn't any fun to cut a hitch off of a trailer and have to weld on a new one, or see one break. I saw that just recently. The hitch was so rusted on this trailer that the trailer come undone. Luckily, the chains held on this pickup, and he was parked alongside the road on the way into town because the trailer hitch on the trailer side, the female receptacle of that had rusted through and broke. So these are kind of tips that I think that, our grandfathers and our fathers had, and they took care of things, and because they didn't have the money to go out and fix it, it was out of necessity. But Vince is telling you, and I'm telling you, things that will cost you less in the long run, but with just a little bit of physical and mental forethought and physical work. It takes very little to wipe off a ball of your trailer with a oily rag, and then wipe out the inside of the hitch that you're hooking up to. It just takes so little to do that. And these are just little things, just like putting that. Now it's more trouble to get underneath a vehicle, a truck, and put that wiring loom cover over the wire, but which is worse, to have to replace the entire wiring harness underneath there, or to just take a little bit of effort, slide that stuff over and put some tie wraps on it, and then you're right, you're done. And then when you also do it yourself, you can pull those wires up sometimes and move them up out of the way, out of the direct travel of the gravel and dirt and grit. So that's the reason these tips of Vince's and mostly Vince and me also, but the reason these things are important, maybe not so much to where people nowadays don't have to live in a way where you've got to take care of things, but I've got a feeling, Vince, that our children, and maybe you and I both, if we live long enough, are going to see a time when they're going to figure out ways to make things last and keep going, because the prices, we're headed into hyperinflation, and people are not going to be able to afford to replace a bunch of these things.
Very well said. So, class, we have grease here, and I happen to like synthetic grease, and you can buy it from the Chinese factory outlet if you want. They have the house brand SuperTech. It's red. Now, you won't be able to see that it's red in these tubs. It comes in a 1 pound tub. You can get it at the auto parts store as well. It just costs more. It's about $5 a pound. You can get it in a tube for a grease gun. It would be synthetic grease for wheel bearings, etc. High temperature. And we buy it by the cases. And I like to keep maybe 15 or 20 tubs of this lying around when it's on sale. Sometimes we can get it for $1 or $2 because the auto parts stores can't wait to get rid of it. So we'll buy out their inventory. So we've got a lifetime supply of this. And I mark with a silver Sharpie on the top. I wipe off the top so it doesn't have any grease on it, of a brand new lid of a 1 pound container. And I write bearing, BRG. And then on another one, I'll write no bearing, no BRG. And the reason for that is I am very concerned about when I put grease on a wheel bearing, I want to make sure that there's no contamination, no dust that has gotten into that grease, for wheel bearings and, universal joints, etc. But the other grease, I'm very careful with not to contaminate, but I might use it for, putting on wheel bolts and lug nuts on tires. Now you got to be really careful, and this is really dangerous. If you don't know what you're doing and you put grease on a wheel stud or wheel bolt or lug nut, you can lose your wheel. So be very careful. I'm going to suggest that you don't do it. I do it, but I use torque wrenches and I've got a lot of experience, 40 years of doing this, maybe 50. But anyway, I have two different tubs of grease. And when I grease a ball hitch, I use the one that says no bearing, meaning it might have a little bit of contamination that I can't see in there, but it's good enough for that purpose. So I do not mix the greases. Okay. I'm very careful. I use, latex gloves, and I don't want to put any dirt in either one of those containers, and I keep the lids on them. But yeah, keep that in mind. Another thing that we do with trailer hitches, every trailer hitch I've seen around here is sloppy. So the ball mount, that's the part that the trailer hitch ball attaches to. And then you put that into the hitch and you put the pin through it and you wiggle it around and it moves up, down, left, and right. It's sloppy. It's sloppy from where? Well, that slop, when you go down the road with your trailer, every bump you hit causes that thing to jostle left, right, up, down, in, out. And it just bangs and bangs and bangs. So what we do is we take a piece of aluminum flashing. That's like aluminum that would be around a chimney flashing, and we wrap that around the ball mount really tightly, so it expands the diameter of the ball mount, and we fit that into the trailer hitch, the receiver, and it takes up that slack, and we cut it to fit, and we use a ball peen hammer to punch out the holes. So Kyle, what we do is we take aluminum flashing that would be used for chimneys, and we have all this stuff lying around the farm from all kinds of projects. So it's about the thickness of a 3x5 file card, if you will, or an oak tag file folder. That's about the thickness of this aluminum, and we cut it into a rectangle about 4 inches wide by about 12 inches long. We wrap it around the ball mount very, very tightly, and then we use then we trim it to size, and we use a ball peen hammer to punch out the holes. There's 2 holes on the ball mount, and that makes a perfectly aligned hole. And then what we do is we radius the corners of this aluminum sheet that we cut, and we slide that over the square tube of the ball mount, slide it into the trailer hitch, put the pin in it, and it doesn't have the slop. Now, sometimes you do it on 3 sides, sometimes you do it on 2 sides, sometimes you do it on all 4 sides. But it takes a lot of the slop, if not all of the slop, out of the ball mount / trailer hitch connection. Your thoughts on that?
That's a fantastic idea, Vince. I've never even considered that. But that's a great idea. I don't really have any other comments other than that. But again, folks, it's just a little bit of pre-planning to save a problem.
Okay, so class, if you see any, by the way, I'm pretty darn sure I've never met Kyle. I've never met his lovely wife either, but, we're all on the same page. And I have a feeling that Kyle and Sharon and Kathy and Rich, a whole bunch of your instructors, we don't throw things out. Is that true?
Oh, never. I've got so much stuff that, in fact, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. The other day, my daughter is calling, and she lives on a farm now with her husband and stuff, but she needed, her dog kept getting out. And so she calls and said, I know who'll have what we need. And so she said, Dad, do you have any scrap tin that laying around there that we could cut to use on this gate? And sure, I've got that, I don't throw things away. I'll fix it. I've still got a Excalibur dehydrator that I picked up out of the dump. And I was looking at the circuit board on it, and it looked to me like one of the little diodes is burnt out. And eventually, one of these days, I'm going to attack fixing that and solder in a new one and see if the dehydrator will work. You know, just I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that computer controlled or is it mechanically controlled?
Mechanically controlled with a little twist. It turns on.
Yeah, so if it looks like a diode, it has two leads, one out of each end, and it's kind of pointed shaped at one end and kind of squared off at the other. It's probably a thermal limiter. So look that up and see if there's such a thing as a thermal limiter. What I'm saying is, should the heating element run away and get too hot, stay on all the time, this would prevent a fire. So that's what I believe that you're looking at. So here's an interesting thing. So yesterday we put a new starter on my new truck. So the original starter was worn out. The truck had like over 250,000 miles on it when I bought it. And the starter didn't have the ability to start the engine. And, the things you look at, is it the batteries, the battery cables, is it the connections, is it the starter? What is it? It could be any of those things. Well, first thing we did was we jumped it with a really good, strong truck battery. And, so it was the starter. So we ordered a starter on the internet, and, it's a General Motors starter. And it's rated at 1.5 kilowatts or 1,500 watts. And it comes from China. Well, this silly thing almost has the ability to start the engine the first time. Almost. So you turn the ignition key to the start position, and it turns over the engine, and then it disconnects before the engine starts. So you've got the key in the start position, the engine's cranking, and then the starter says, time's up. I'm not doing it anymore. Almost long enough to start the engine. So you have to do it twice. All right. So, all right, what are we going to do with that thing? Well, it's really hard to send it back. Probably cost as much to send it back as we paid for the silly, substandard Chinese part. So we go to the big box store. Oh, we try to get the original one rebuilt. They go, no, it's too shot. Can't rebuild it. The armature's too shot. So we go to the big box store, and they're $200 for the lifetime guarantee, best in class, and we get that. And this is brand new, and they want the core. They want our old starter to go with the new starter. And I'll tell you more about this. You won't believe what I'm going to tell you. Kyle Harris is with us, and we're talking about all kinds of tips, and he's reacting and adding information to some of the tips in the book. I think it's great. Kyle's experience, his sharing experience with you on the air. So I was thinking about this starter. So the original equipment starter went to have it rebuilt after a couple 100,000 miles, and it was shot. It was shot because the guy who sold us the truck didn't have a good battery, and the battery under voltage, under current, caused the starter to burn up, and it can't be fixed. So one point is, if you think that, I'll just jump my car, and I'll buy a battery later, forget it. If you've got a dead battery or a really weak battery, it can affect your driving. It can affect your transmission control computer. It can affect your lighting system computer. It can affect your engine control computer. There's probably about 100 computers in your car if you have a relatively new one. So your drivability is dependent on a good battery. And some cars have two batteries. Like a Mercedes has a hidden battery. It's called a secondary battery, and that controls all kinds of things, including braking. So you need to have good batteries. All right, so that's one thing. If you postpone and jumpstart because you think, you'll get a battery later, forget it. Get it before later, because then you're going to be looking at a starter and maybe an alternator. So now you might jump the cost of, a $150 battery up to $1,000 between an alternator and a starter and whatever else may go wrong. So keep that in mind. So along this line of thinking, we got a starter on the internet, and it was 1.5 kilowatts. It was not enough to start the car, but it's the one that fits. It's the one that's recommended, and it's really, great reviews and all that nonsense. So what happens is you go to start the car, and it turns the engine over almost long enough for the engine to start, but not long enough, almost long enough. So you have to start it twice, which means twice the contact wear, twice everything wear. Okay? And eventually it starts, and what happens is it disconnects prematurely. The starter disengages prematurely. So we take that out, and get one from the big box store. And this is not their silver one. This is not their economy one. This is their gold lifetime guarantee one, the best one they've got. And it's 1.7 kilowatts. So it's stronger. All right. So here's what happens. We put it in and I back the truck out of the automotive shop and the starter does not disengage. So the first one disengages prematurely. This one does not disengage. So what happens is the starter is designed to rotate the engine, crank the engine until it starts, and then the starter disengages. Well, this one stays engaged. That means that the engine is now turning the starter, and it will destroy the flywheel. It will destroy the starter gear. It'll destroy the armature. It'll destroy the spur gears. So I shut it off. I start it, and then it starts fine. And then I drive it for like a mile, and I shut it off because I hear this noise. The darn thing engaged. So now we've got two starters. Regular cost and a really expensive one. Neither one of them's any good. What I'm saying, so it's going to be, now we're up to starter number 3. That's coming today. They're going to deliver a new one today. I don't know where to go. Where do you buy a starter that works? They all come from China. And they're junk. So going forward, we are going to be repairing our cars with parts that we think that we can get that are substandard, that will not last. That we see this every day now. It's not an anomaly. It's every day. So what's the new failure of the new part going to be? Kyle, any comments?
Oh, you're absolutely right, Vince. And I think this is personally part of that planned obsolescence that we talked about earlier. It's pathetic how that, just like your intake manifold, that they don't provide a rubber gasket with intake manifold gaskets. It's insane that you can't buy a starter. And think about this. This is communist China that is providing things for us, and the greedy American corporations that have took it there because they can make more money on their bottom line. It infuriates me. The same kind of problem I've run into myself. And the things there are with the federal government dumping so much money into our economy, everything is going to cost much, much, much more. I'll give you a couple of examples, just recently. So about 6 months ago, my wife and I decided, the seal meal for vacuum packing your food, ours was not working correctly. It was a Food Saver brand at that time. And so I looked online and the one that was, not the Food Saver, but the other one, Seal Meal was rated much higher and at a lot less cost. So we went to the Chinese factory outlet and we picked up one for $29 and it worked just fine. So this is about maybe 4 or 5 weeks later. And I told my wife, I said, I think we should go get another one of those things just in case, because we had the more expensive Food Saver brand that did not hold up to hardly anything. It was pathetic. Anyway, we went back there and that same exact Seal Meal was $39.95. Had went up $10 in 5 weeks. And then, so what happened, interestingly, so we went ahead, I bought it anyway. I told her, I said, it's just going to go up, And I was at a thrift store the other day, and they had a Seal Meal sitting on the shelf for $1. So I told her, I said, I'm going to buy it. What have I got to lose here? We took it home and used it to vacuum pack probably about 40 different bags of things that we're going to freeze and keep and wanted to keep moisture out of. But the same thing was true with 2x4s. We went about 3 months ago. My son was down there with me, and we picked up some 2x4s. They were $5.63 a piece. So I go back this is about 4 or 5 weeks ago, something like that, 6 weeks maybe, and the same exact 2x4 is now $6.19. So I told my wife, I said, this is crazy. I bought 10 more at that $6.19 price, because I got a feeling that we're going to be paying $10, $12 for a stinking 2x4 before the end of the year.
When we built our house, I was buying 2x4s. And I think they're about 84 cents a piece 15 years ago.
Yeah. I remember getting them for 99 cents all the time. And like you said, about 10 years ago, it was nothing.
Okay, so we talked about these defective auto parts. How about alternators? So we have a Dodge Cummins turbo diesel, and it's a 1999 pickup truck, 3/4 ton. And we can't get a good alternator. And, you buy them and you buy the gold one, the lifetime guarantee. You put it in your vehicle and, take the half hour that we can bang them out in a half hour, maybe even a little bit less, but, there's no sense in rushing it. So you put the alternator in and you look at the voltmeter and you say, it's charging too high. But it's within the range, but it's high. Well, what that means is you're going to boil over your batteries. Now, how much are batteries? Well, they used to be, 20 years ago, you could get them in the $30 range. For those same batteries now are like $150. So with a Dodge Cummins turbo diesel truck, it takes two of them. So now you're looking at $150 and $150, $300 for a pair of batteries to run it. And now your brand new alternator is overcharging them. It's going to destroy the batteries. The acid is going to boil out over. It's going to corrode the terminals. Then you're going to have a weakened condition for the contact, and your starter's not going to get enough voltage. Your transmission's going to act stupid. It's not going to know how to shift. So we have to keep cleaning these battery terminals because we can't, let me say it a different way. We can't seem to get an alternator that charges at the right current and voltage. So now the transmission once a month we have to clean the battery terminals because the transmission doesn't know when to shift because the batteries are being overcharged and weakened. And so what do? You go to the auto parts store and you say, look, you just destroyed with the third alternator under warranty. You just destroyed a new set of batteries and I'd like a new set of batteries. Thank you very much. They won't do that. So here we are. We're destroying our cars with cheap, junky Chinese products. And what happens with these things? Well, the regulators are substandard. The regular internal to the alternator is substandard. It doesn't, the tolerances of the electronics are not tight enough. Another example, I decided to take my temperature, yesterday. We got 2 new thermometers and I decided, well, let me take my temperature with one. And we got 2 identical thermometers at the same time. Just came in. Took my temperature. 0.3 of a degree off between the two of them. Which one's right? I don't know. This is where we are. We don't make thermometers. We don't make alternators. We don't make replacement parts. The Chinese products, as I see them, are inferior and substandard. And there's an old term that was used when I was at the university, and it related to the high cost of cheap labor. The high cost of cheap labor. So you have cheap labor making these defective substandard items. And the high cost of it is what happens to the customer with these defective starters, alternators. So if it says make in China, I am really suspect. Now when it comes in, Kyle, I believe you mentioned Mexico. Now I got to tell you, I had an El Camino that was manufactured, a Chevrolet El Camino 1985, made in Mexico. That thing was perfect. No problems. I mean, it just ran and ran and ran. Have no problems with it. As a matter of fact, I started using since 1985 was the manufactured year. I used Mobile One in it, and they said you could use it for 25,000 miles between oil changes. You could back then. Not anymore. Not anymore. Our new feeling is if you have full synthetic oil and you have a relatively new vehicle, 5,000 maximum length of use of the oil in your crankcase. If it's full synthetic, top of the line brand. If it's conventional, 3,000. Those are our numbers right now. That's where we're comfortable as a maximum duration between oil changes. Back to Mexico, the brake parts, brake pads that come from Mexico, I have no problems with them. I think they're fine. They work. I have never had a serious problem with brake pads coming apart, failing, causing a risky situation for the driver of a car that we've used, disc brake pads that came from Mexico. So I'm good with that. I really am. I think they do a fine job. Any comments?
I totally agree. You know, it's funny. I remember many years ago, and you probably do too, that everything was made in America, and you could count on them things just lasting and lasting and lasting. And then all of a sudden you started seeing stuff show up and come made in Mexico, you know, and that was not quite as good as the Americans ones, but it was okay. You could get by with that, and it's like, you know, the frog in the water getting boiled. But they were good, you know. They weren't as good as the American made, but they were good. And then all of a sudden you started seeing Japanese things being made in Japan. Well, they started out really crappy, and then they started getting a little bit better. And so, all right, well, that wasn't so bad then. And then now, all of a sudden, we're getting stuff from China, and it's just like they can't seem to put two things together at all that stay the same and that work right. I hate it.
Well, and when they make bearings, if it takes an ounce of grease, they go, no, we'll use a quarter of an ounce of grease. That's why we have so many bearing failures. Class, I want to thank Kyle. We're not done yet, but I want to thank him for sharing his 2 hours today of expertise and his opinions on how he does things. Kyle, let's switch and put your electrician's hat on. You are an experienced commercial electrician, and I do things in wiring that I'd love to hear your comments on. These are things that are not in the book. I'm talking about the wiring books, but these are things that I think are better practices. So one of the things that I do, well, first of all, class, I like to use these blue boxes. You've seen them at the big box store, electrical receptacle and switch boxes. And you can get them in metal or you can get them in blue plastic. Now, the blue plastic to me makes sense because there is no danger of an electrical short between the box, which would be grounded, and the device, meaning the switch or the receptacle. There's no concern because the plastic is non-conductive. So I like that. And I know that they'll last at least 30 years because I haven't had a single failure in 30 years with these blue Carlon, C-A-R-L-O-N brand boxes. And they're inexpensive and they work. Kyle, any comments between metal and plastic? I've used both, and I still do.
Yes, I do. For residential use, and actually almost all commercial in now is all in plastic. The theory, and it's actually a true one, is that if you're in corrosive environments at all, to use the zinc coated metal, you'll use the EMT, which is a piping that you pull the wires through, and then you'll bond those with connectors to the pipe to the box. And then the box itself has a little wire, screw in the back that you'll put this green grounding pigtail on, and that ties also to the ground of your receptacle, so that the entire system is bonded and grounded together as one unit. For corrosive environments, all of them will be used in either rigid or some type of intermediate. It's called intermediate metal conduit, which is in between the rigid, solid, hard steel ones, and the EMT, which is the thin wall tubing. That is also, all of them are zinc coated, if they're in corrosive environments. But commercially, yeah, it used to be when I was wiring commercially all the time, everything was in EMT or IMC or rigid pipe, depending on what damage could happen to the place you were working. If they were running forklifts around all the time, most, where they were operating with a lot of that and it had to be exposed, almost all of that was done in rigid, which is the real steel pipe, in case it got hit or banged into or something along those lines. But they were all bonded together as one unit in a sense, with the ground to protect it.
Okay, and now switching to residential, what do you do? Do you use the blue plastic most of the time, the metal most of the time? What do you do with Romex?
Okay, so if you do not put Okay, so for anything exposed, like in my basement for rigid, for concrete, and I did not have any of the piping inside the concrete. I mount that on the outside of the concrete, and I use metal. If it's inside a 2x4, 2x6 wall, I will just pull the Romex through there, use the blue boxes, make sure things are grounded well. I I'd never use those plug-ins where you can strip the wire and plug it into the back of a receptacle. I just won't do it. I will strip the wire, curl it around, put it underneath the screw so you have a really good connection. But just Romex on the inside of a wall but if you're going to run it exposed to forces of nature, so to speak, even on the inside of your basement, what I do, like mine's running right on the outside of the concrete, I will run it in EMT thin wall pipe and tie it all together, bonded together, and pull my wire through there with that.
Okay, that's exactly what I do. And in the walls, if I'm using Romex and I've got studded walls and it's going to be sheetrocked over, whenever possible, which is probably 99% of the time or greater, I will enter the box from the bottom. So even if the wire is coming from overhead, I'll run it behind the box, put a loop in it, staple it, at 6 inches before it goes into the box, and then the wire goes in through the bottom knockout of the box. And the reason for that is because there's always dust in these walls. No matter how good the construction, dust will enter the box, gravity will pull the dust into the box, and gravity keeps the dust from going up. So I keep more dust out of the boxes by putting the wires in from the bottom. Your thoughts? Got 10 seconds.
Great idea, Vince. That's a great idea.
Okay. Kyle, I hope we can do this more often. You've got a wealth of information that you're sharing with us. And it looks like we've figured out there are better ways besides the conventional ways of doing things. Kyle, again, thank you so much for your friendship. Class, I will not be available by the phone today.